One of my very first memories of Project Riese was seeing historian Igor Witkowski in a huge underground bunker showing how a burning napkin would be sucked into a pipe, suggesting a large hidden space behind. That image of this hidden room started my journey through the German secrets, the Bell, the Henge, and General Kammler, and today I finally get to see this place for myself. Over the past many years of taking you all through the German special projects and following the footsteps of the SS General Hans Kammler, the one man who was in a position to know and control most of these, before his disappearance at the end of the war. Yet we have seen comparisons to the sites of all these projects from the SIII in Jonastal, Bergkristall, Project Riese, and in the absence of detailed documentation, I have been going to these places to determine what was possible and seemingly what could have been planned here. We are now going back to Poland, now that I have given you all a better idea of what was possible for the Germans and the SS to construct, even towards the very end of the war. And as promised, over the next few weeks, we will visit the remaining Riese sites before returning to Jonastal. The problem with Riese is the lack of documentation. Even the concentration camp prisoners, eyewitnesses who were there, are not entirely sure what they saw, and the project workers were highly separated and compartmentalized, for the very reason that in that case no one person would be able to put enough together. Even the number of laborers are widely disputed, but seemingly landing over 30,000. And last week I showed you how large a tunnel system could be built with just 500-600 in 5 months. So how is it now possible that with 30,000 plus laborers and 10,000 plus civilian workers and companies hired to build this complex, we are actually seeing so very little construction? Where did the money go? And the cement expended, where did that go? Well, we now have more documents to show you, and I'm taking you to what was expected to be the main communication center. But looking at it, it raises more questions, even what I'm being told and what some documents show, because they are conflicting with one another. Siegfried Schmelcher, Chief Baumeister for Führerhauptquartier for the Tod Organization. He was appointed in 1939. However, in November 1944, he compiled a technical report of 19 Führer headquarters, noting that 16 were already existing. Riese was one of these, expected to be completed in August 1945. Now, the first thing that struck me about his report was that the SIII in Jonastal is not mentioned on it. Again, reminding us that the story of Jonastal being just another Führerhauptquartier is not correct, but we knew this. Also, Sebelin is mentioned and suggested as a Führerhauptquartier, which it was not. It was the Reichspost bunker in Sossen. In fact, the three listed last have nothing in common with each other, the last being Berchtesgaden. Another document, suggested to be one of the oldest mentioning Project Riese, was from one of the many civilian construction companies hired for the construction. This was dated December 1943, but we have clear indications of work starting on these sites years earlier, both at the castle and under the Henge. The area was sealed off years before. And also the absence of clear information as to exactly how many workers were involved is also strange. The initial labor came from Auschwitz. Thereafter the majority came through Großrosen. So I personally went to their archive, yet here they point-blank stated that they had no idea exactly how many people, forced laborers, were working there, nor the number of dead, nor even the number of civilian contractors was clear to them. It was also suggested that bodies were buried in two smaller cemeteries, or, had they died at work, returned to Großrosen for cremation. This would both give us some more exact numbers of the number of prisoners died there, however none still exists. Then we have absolute documentation that the castle was absolutely built as a Führerhauptquartier, And we have documentation it was absolutely built for Ribbentrop and the Foreign Office. Yet many of the guards were actually from the Luftwaffe, and none of the tunnels underneath supports either of these stories. So now we're looking at 8 main Riese Project sites, those that we know of, because there is by now a strong suspicion that more locations may not have been excavated fully or found, or existing mine tunnels at the time had been utilized as part of the project, yet some of these have also not yet been found. But from many eyewitnesses post-war, a far larger underground have been described, similar to the stories of what we hear of Jonastal. So this year I joined up with Kawaik Jones to look at some of these seemingly unconnected tunnel systems also. However, as we all know, communication is important and key. So let's start at one of the 4 suspected communication centers of Riese, the Riese tunnel system. It's relatively small, yet it's a very compact tunnel system, large tunnels, and several layers of access control. And it is placed right next to the small concrete communication bunker called SIII Rudiger or LV11, this bunker we found last year. And I found that this communication central still carried the local networks until just 10 years ago, so it must have been substantial. And we know that at least 301 kilometers of line were laid during the war. Now inside we will hear a large generator room, yet it is not placed far from the flytrap or the large suspected power station above the tunnel system of Odash. Another system suggested to be a Führerhauptquartier, just like the castle. However, I will, as always, point to the utilitarian and industrial feel of all of these project sites and the above-ground bunkers. More I'll show you later. This all gives me a doubt that any of these were actually meant for Hitler as a headquarters complex.
Nawet 15 lat temu i to jest strzelnica, tam są te rury i dopiero raz można powiedzieć.
Jeśli chodzi o te rury, to już tam...
No to niech pan powie, że
legenda stała się rozwiana.
No to super, to bardzo super, bo jak ja to byłem, to jeszcze nie było.
Udało się właśnie kilkanaście lat temu i to jest...
The access control.
The access control,
Yes.
Tak, pomieszczenie, które miało zabezpieczać główną część obiektu przed wtargnięciem grupowanych osób.
It was supposed to be a protection for the whole object, not to get any other people to get in.
And they were still working on this.
Yes.
So did anything ever get into production here, or they were still working on it?
Czy cokolwiek tu było produkowane, czy cały czas nad tym pracowanie?
Nie. Tutaj jeśli chodzi o projekt Riese, budowa została porzucona.
So when it comes to the Riese project, this whole construction site was abandoned.
Pracę wyprowadzono od listopada 1943 roku do początku 1945 roku.
From November 33 to February, January 35.
W momencie, kiedy zbliżył się front wschodni,
as the Russians came, they just flew. So it's prepared for another wall.
There was going to be a wall here.
Tak, bo przejście miało być przez wartownię. Nie po prostu szkolenie, tylko przez wartownię.
So the entrance had to be through this.
They would have to go through here.
Not through the main tunnel. That's like in the last complex I told you. Probably this main tunnel was supposed to be blocked so that they can use this one with the steps. But look.
Łącznie miał być wałkiem przeszczepczym. To drugie. Pierwsze miało być w chodniku na wprost wejście, przejście miało do niego prowadzić.
Okay, there used to be, they were planning 2 shooting sites. This is the first one, that's the second one. The first one was supposed to be in this room and shooting straight to the entrance.
So a well done access control, a little bit like the back road of the castle. One of the things I found interesting about this access control is down the hallway, we'll see in a minute, it's backed up by another. So you have quite a significant amount of access control. The main tunnel would be sealed off and all personnel would have to come through this one and then another one past that, which is more than I've seen in most other complexes where there would just be one. However, it's hard to judge since the complex is not finished. And now finally, after all of these years of wondering about this huge possible space that would create an overpressure where Igor had small pieces of burning paper sucked into nowhere, I get to see it myself.
So, as I've been there 15 years ago, there was a big story, the big question about the pipes you can see in the ceiling. Yeah. Because those pipes were, there was some air pressure getting out of them, not like the wind, you know.
That's right, yes, I remember that.
Yes, and there you can see they were figuring out what it could be and why and so. And as I've been there 15 years ago, it was still a mystery. But now it's not anymore, because they dug a tunnel, and you will see the entrance to this tunnel very soon. And they actually noticed that those pipes are there probably because of the not so spectacular reason when, as they were digging it, this whole tunnel, they came to this, like the place where the two layers are jointing, yeah? And it was very unstable, so they were exploding, and they were exploding way more material than they wanted. So they had to refill it with a concrete, and here we come to the missing concrete from Albert Speer's diaries, because it's hard to say if there is 1 meter of concrete or 5 or 6 meters above us. Maybe they had to refill it, like you actually see here. Maybe they had to refill it somehow, and then you don't know how much of the concrete went in. So, theory of the guy who's there with us, he said that probably it was, like I said, it was too much of the material that they actually blown away, and they had to refill it with a concrete, and the amount of the concrete was so high that they were afraid if this concrete will actually expand and it will actually start to work as a concrete, not as a liquid or something that's loose. And they used those pipes for ventilation of what's above us. And they actually made a tunnel. Let's maybe go there. Yeah.
Looks funny, when I was looking at them, I was thinking mnemonic tubes for communication.
Yeah, Struckmann, I know what you mean.
Yeah, or having the little, like in Sussen, where you had the communication all over Berlin, you had tubes.
Yeah, pressure tubes.
Yeah, you have a message coming through.
It was not from the level above, which doesn't exist. It was just from some empty cavities above us that they didn't manage to fill with the concrete. So now, as they finish the tunnel to above the concrete level, it's actually the pressure is gone, the air pressure. So probably this air that was getting out of here was getting somewhere between the rocks and the concrete because it didn't connect properly.
So there's no more pressure on that?
Yeah, it doesn't blow anymore.
That's actually interesting.
Let's see the tunnel.
Yeah.
I've noticed this tunnel entrance as I was walking in. You see?
Yeah.
And
oh, yes.
Yeah. So they actually checked it, and now this myth is debunked.
Aw, but Igor really liked that one. I saw Igor with this napkin that would fly in there, and there's. I think that was one of the first stories I ever heard about Riese. So this is the other. That's interesting. So you have one entrance there, and then another armored door there, and then I'm guessing another there. So this entire side had the concrete cement in there. Which kind of make me think that this is where everything was going to happen.
Let us for a moment take a closer look at the numbers and construction breakdown as it's outlined in the Siegfried Schmelter report from late 1944. In this report, he clearly outlines the 19 separate locations dedicated for Hitler as headquarters or headquarters for the army. In it, Riese, Seberlin, and Berchtesgaden are separated as they are still under construction, citing the others as complete. Now 3 of these are reinforced train tunnels. However, Zeppelin was never used or intended for use for Hitler as a headquarters, but for the Reichspost, an organization with a clear and dedicated nuclear program. And some of the locations here were never even visited by Hitler. In the subsequent pages of this report, Riese is cited as a location for Führerhauptquartier, Oberkommando des Heeres, Oberkommando Marine, Oberkommando Luftwaffe, and Reichsführer SS, and one for the Foreign Office, that means Ribbentrop. You will note that counts only 6 locations, yet there are 8 noted Riese locations that we know of. And a key note to remember, the Henge location in Ludwigsdorf is not a Riese location, and its labor and construction figures are not included anywhere in this report. At the location of the old mine was the power plant, an explosive factory, and miles of underground tunnels under the Henge, in an area that was secured by the SS from long before the origins of Project Riese. Also, the castle was obtained by the Reich far earlier than this report. Now here is a detailed chart of what type of construction was done or expected to be done. That is not entirely clear, but telling is that generally the above-ground construction was expected to outweigh the Führerhauptquartier locations by multitudes throughout the projects, and tunnels were expected to be just a smaller part of this. It was suggested that the cement expenditure chart I showed you last year could have been planned only and not actually concrete used. However, as I have now obtained 3 separate concrete expenditure reports showing numbers changing and increasing, it must be the material expended at the time of that particular monthly report. This gives us a better idea of how much to actually look for. Here in the area there are some large reinforced buildings that I will take you to over the next weeks, but nothing adds up to the amount of concrete expended. In the report is another great color-coded graph which shows the Führerhauptquartier by monthly, yearly, and man-hours expended. And it shows the Führerhauptquartier Riese, Rudiger, or Uhlensgebirge as it's also known, was not prioritized until 1944. And as of 1944 throughout the entire construction period, an average of 10,000 men were working on all the Führerhauptquartier projects, peaking way above that at several times. We also have some documents from the private companies involved in the construction and know that Krupp was involved as well. But what none of these documents show is what other projects were involved in the area, or what locations were dedicated to what organization. And I find it extremely odd that given the charge that the Foreign Office von Ribbentrop accounted for the smallest amount expended of all resources, yet they claimed the entire complex, which was by far the most finished, that under the castle. This makes no sense. And in my opinion, judging from seeing the tunnels under the castle, gives it more credibility to the stories that this was a site for something else, which again lends itself doubts about the entire project. It could, theoretically, have been labeled as a Führerhauptquartier to cover for other things, which is a possibility. However, the lack of Jonastal S3 with its 30,000 laborers not being mentioned in this report by the gentleman in charge of building Führerhauptquartier tells us that the story of such a Hauptquartier in Thüringen can be ruled out. And again, why then was Zeppelin listed here? In supporting that story, that this report covered locations that were not dedicated for Hitler's Hauptquartiers, although listed as such. I have visited and will show you most of Hitler's Hauptquartiers, including the very largest of them, yet none of them comes close to resembling what we are seeing here in the mountains. And above all, we still do not have any information on paper as to what the SS were doing here, or constructing or researching. They had their own resources and were perfectly capable of constructing their own sites. Now this report, however, gives us a better idea of what was done here, in relation to the construction, but it tells us nothing about the allocation or usage of these sites, yet it does list these as a complex for all leading branches of the Reich, yet only vaguely hinted at in one page, the cover page. But let's go back and see what we have here. And I really am very grateful to one of the managers of this particular tunnel system that he took his time to show us around and share his knowledge of the place.
So those doors were gas-proof, yeah? They were panzer doors, and they were opening inside. So that if you want to get in the complex, you have to damage the doors who are opening to you, towards you. So it's more difficult.
So this would eventually have been closed off.
No, tam byłoby zamurowane.
So they had to go through here.
In the last years of the war, when they actually decided to stop building constructing the headquarters for the highest officials of the Third Reich, they decided to use those undergrounds to support the production of the nearby construction sites. I mean, construction producers. And one of those producers some of them were actually working on the parts for V1 and V2, and this is the way you can connect it. So there were some production sites very close to this area. Among them was the Krupp construction site in a nearby village, and this nearby place from Krupp was producing the single parts for V1 and V2 for Luftwaffe.
Oh, so here's... Okay, I didn't expect any more of this. So is this another access?
Co tu miał być? Tu miała być ściana, bo przejście miało być poprowadzone na dalszej części obiektu przez śluzę.
A to jest znowu śluza druga?
Tak.
So they wanted to build a wall here, that's true, and that's like a second airlock. Access control room, yeah. But it's kind of a smaller one. And this one is opening outside already because, yeah.
Tu też na tej zasadzie jak wartowni byłoby zamontowane drzwi dwuskółowe otwierające się na wchodzącego, bo jest to po gniazdach tutaj mam.
I still have the scaffolding wood.
20 po 7, jest moja ulubiona.
No to tak dostało to kiedyś do... Nie mają to nic wspólnego z Riese, tak?
Ja wiem, policzyłem pancerotlasie, mają chyba 35 rodzajów samych drzwi. Teraz sobie zbuduj takie biurko, masz 100 do budowania, w każdym inne drzwi, w każdym pomieszczeniu inny telefon.
Aż do niego.
Yeah, with all the wood in place and they were far from being ready to do anything here.
No mówię, że ten drewno rzeczywiście gdzieś daleko od zaczęcia robienia czegokolwiek.
So all the door frames, are they from here or did they find them?
Ramy to są stąd, czy gdzieś przywieźliście?
Nie, przywiezione.
No, it's not from here.
So this is the upstairs. This is the two tunnels. This is the top floor and this is the bottom. Or is this is very large for being.
Yeah, it's kind of very large.
It is very large for what
But maybe because of the rock formations, it was they blown it and they didn't want to blow that much. But it did too. Because in order to avoid using the structure you put on the side of the building when you want to access it from the outside. Gerustwał. First they dug the lower tunnel.
Mało przekroju.
Very small.
Później kominy do góry.
Then they were digging chimneys after.
Od kominów drążony górny chodnik.
And from the chimneys they were digging the main tunnel.
Poszerzane do właściwych
making it wider.
Tutaj sięgałaby do tych betonowych ścian.
It would be touching. This is the main tunnel and this is the level it was supposed to be touching.
Dopiero wtedy usunięto by strop.
And then they would remove the part between.
I na końcu wybrano by półki z dolnego chodnika, bo duża komina.
And then they would remove the parts from the bottom tunnel, left and right, and then they would have a big room.
But yeah, they were far from being ready to move any kind of production in here.
And the production could be introduced to the raw objects like this.
Yeah.
It was not supposed to be unnecessarily concreted. Thanks to his pictures, you can actually see how did the reality look like.
But he's not the one that did the painting, the drawings from the castle.
No, he's not this one.
This resembles the large technical room we saw in the large tunnel system suspected to be a headquarters for Hitler, although it's hard to tell what accesses there would have been since the subfloor is not entirely installed.
They are now modern.
Yeah. The drainage is rather interesting. These were supposed to have been technical tunnels. They weren't for drainage.
To było do techniczne tunele czy do odwodnienia?
Technicznie i dodatkowo.
Both.
Both?
So this part which we see now, it was made for as electric plant for them, because this chamber was supposed to be for an electric machine. Generator, exactly. It was supposed to be technical, this part, to produce electricity for this.
That I understand. But see, this is one of the things I was if this was supposed to be a headquarters or a bunker for a dignity, who was this supposed to have been a bunker for?
They are not able to Okay. It says that they don't know which one of the complexes is theirs. He assumes personally that they wanted to place this big this Funkzentrale radio collection center here.
Yeah, because this is really serious for.
Yeah, but it requires a lot of place and machinery to increase the signal strength.
Yes.
And that's what they wanted to achieve.
Yeah, because this looks very technical.
Okay, so coming back to the reason why those places were built, we are not able to say that this one was for Hitler, the other one for somebody else. But from the other documents, we are able to actually find the information that another one, Osówka, the one which we haven't seen today, was made for Adolf Hitler himself.
Dla Hitlera Włodarz dla dowództwa wojsk lądowych.
So Wolfsberg was supposed to be for Ober Kommando des Herren.
Soboń dla dowództwa wojsk lotniczych.
Soboń was for the Luftwaffe.
Gontowa dla Himmlera, SS.
Wow, the place which we see today, Gontowa, it was supposed to be for Himmler.
A zamek książ dla Ribbentropa, dla Ministerstwa Spraw Zagranicznych.
And the castle, Fürstenstein Castle for Ribbentrop.
Now, one of these suggested early documents of Project Riese was claimed to be this one from December 1943, preparing for some 600 workers of the Tod organization in Berlin from a construction company. However, work on Riese sites began long before the Tod organization became involved. It started earlier under the Schlesische Industriegemeinschaft AG, a subsidiary of the SS-owned DEST, German Earth and Stone Works, which was founded in 1938. And if construction began in 1943, planning must have been underway years before. Besides, the late 1943, 600 workers for any of these project sites would simply not have gone very far by any stretch. So this makes little sense, especially if we go under the thesis this was an early document. Far more must have existed, but have never come to light. And what about the workers allocated to the Nobel Dynamite explosive production by the Henge location? This production started long before late 1943, and in late 1943, synthetic oil was being produced from coal. So why was the cleanest coal in Germany, that under the Henge, not put to use for coal extraction for synthetic fuel? Unless these mines were now used for something else, as we suspect they were. It is here that the conflicting documents and information begins to feel like deliberate misinformation, again pointing to something more, and slowly I am beginning to wonder about the known 7 systems here. All these resources were spent, but they were hardly spent on these. So where exactly did it all go?
Który przecina na linii tych dwóch zawałów urotwór, także firma Albert Holtrader no po prostu przerwała, nie poradziła sobie z stabilizowaniem widoczności.
No to na widzę, żebyście widzieli, czy się obsuwa, czy nie. Znaczy to jest spray.
Czy nie, jak nie podbieramy, to się nic nie dzieje.
It looks like a shaft, but it was not. They were also assuming it's a shaft, but then they took some geologists and then they say that there is a tectonical...
So this is not a collapse?
It is, but only because two tectonical lines are connecting here and it was too difficult for them, so they abandoned it.
Nie tektoniczne, tylko geologiczne.
Geological.
Geology, yeah.
Uskok, muszę sobie przetłumaczyć, to jest niedozwolone.
Przedstawione właściwie jest niewiele. Bo niestety większość obiektów nastawia się na sensację, na ściągnięcie za szeroką
That the problem that it's very difficult to find a place which is actually showing the history like it was.
Yeah.
Most of the commercial objects are focusing on the sensation and being controversial maybe, so that it drags more people.
That's where the money get it to be a problem, yeah. No, I agree.
There is one famous shot from this place with a Polish Fiat 100.
Yes, I remember that.
Organizowałem tą wózkę i to robię właściwie za własne środki. To jest tym maluszkiem.
That? He was the one who was doing this.
Really?
Yeah.
That was a black and white photo, isn't it? It's a long time ago.
Kiedy to było?
2005, 2006, 2007 rok, w tych latach to...
2005. So,
Really?
czarno-białe zdjęcie wtedy.
Nie, kolorowe, w internecie, który jest to kolorowy naprawdę.
So this chamber which we see now was supposed to be 18 meters long. And this is the connection with this chamber, but it's a little bit unstable. That's why it was supported like you see with an old railway.
Yeah.
Drążone z dwóch stron,
Yeah.
od pierwszej i trzeciej strony, tu i tu miał być połączone.
So they were digging it from two sides, from the first entrance which we used and from the third which we will use as a way out.
There's a third down that way.
No, this one was supposed to be from here till here and 80 meters long.
Okay.
10 metrów wysoko, 8
10
szeroko.
meters high
8 szeroko.
and 8 meters wide. But there was supposed to be only 6 meters wide production hole here.
Oh.
So there is 1 meter of a concrete on the left and
Yeah.
1 meter on the right, which gives us the idea about the amount.
That's what it didn't hang up. How many workers worked in here and how many people died here?
He has no data for a particular complex, but for the whole reason he can say something. At least 13,000 of the prisoners were brought up here, down here, and at least 5,000 of them didn't make it. And there's even a cemetery.
Robotników przymusowych jeńców wojennych.
And also the prisoners of war, they are there. And the bodies of the people from Gross-Rosen were taken back to Gross-Rosen and then they were buried. And from January 45, bodies of the Jewish prisoners were buried in another village somewhere here. Okay. If there were a lot of them and how many and in which reason, then that's what. Now we're going to see how tall are you. Okay, 165.
Very far.
Oh, this is geological stuff.
Yeah.
Like, you know, some people would say that this is the oil tank, diesel tank, which is hidden in the wall, and this is the wall of it crying, but this is probably mangan or cobalt, and this is the iron. Yeah. Czemu to jest tak nisko? Niżej?
Trudno powiedzieć, wygląda szczelnie stare dążone do swojej budowy.
Maybe because it was only built to transport rocks.
Yeah.
And after that it was supposed to be locked.
107.
I mean, locked it or not used anymore.
This is where the cold air went.
And for a minute, let's talk about the draft and the air in this particular system, which is really, really interesting. The first tunnel system, remembering they're all connected, was nice, warm, humid air. In this one, the third, is freezing cold. It's very interesting how the air moves, and in the summer or winter, the direction of the hot, cold air in changes.
Nice and clean tunnels. It's unusual, isn't it?
Czyste tunele, aż rzadko spotykacie. W sensie nie wypełnione jakimś morzem, kanem czy coś. Tu miała być wartownia? Tak. There was supposed to be the access control room.
Yes. And there's the rest of the turn plate.
Yes. But you can see, so this one was supposed to be used as an entrance because they have this access control room. The middle one, it's not there, so probably it was made only temporarily. Ja generalnie podzielnia i podzielnia, no. To ręcznie robione, znaczy ręcznie robione, jaskinie, kopalnie też jak najbardziej. Ostatnio nagrałem taki 1,5 godziny filmu o podzielnią Wrocławiu, gdzie gadałem z kolegą, gdzie też wszystko zostało opalone.
This seems like a good time to remind you all that we don't actually have any finished construction plans for any of these tunnels. The planned layouts that we have that I can show you are the ones based on what we're seeing here today. So the intent for all of them may be considerably more than what we can see.
From this area, control room?
To będzie lustrzane odbicie lokowi z pierwszego.
So it's unfinished construction.
So there's no third over here.
I nie ma tej kolejnej tego.
Myślę, że nie, to albo miała być, albo w ogóle
It's not there, but maybe they wanted to build it, but they didn't start. Wow, tu jest zimniej niż tamtych? Może być?
Tak, to jest szkolenie wydechowa. Czyli już schłodzone powietrze jest wyrzucane.
That's an exhaustion tunnel. That's why it's called that.
W jedynce było dość znaleźć.
The one is inhaling, and this one is
Dlatego,
exhaling.
że jedynką jest zasysane powietrze w tej chwili, a trójką wyrzucane. Zimą ciąg przetraca.
It's funny because in the summer, the number 1 is taking the air in, and number 3 is taking it out, but in the winter it switches.
Ale nie tylko
Really?
siłę, jak przez większość w danym sezonie. Jeżeli ten ciąg przetraca, to jest sygnał na to, że coś się dzieje z pogodą.
This is the other side of the first natural collapse we saw.
Well, now we know what's on the other side of it, so that makes sense.
Then you say thank you.
Well, very nice.
To jest druga część tej największej pokoju. I tu mamy też zachowaną metodę, dzięki której tak duża komora była tworzona.
So this is in this part of this tunnel you can actually see how where they digging it, like step by step, like in a quarry.
Yeah.
Tarasowe.
It's a terrace system.
Czyli takie pół.
Considering they were supposedly only planning a 6-meter work floor, these tunnels are very, very large, but it gives you a good idea how much excavation that took place.
Po to, żeby jak największej materiału padło na najniższy poziom, więźniowie usuwali Europę, przesuwano się tak na lukach.
So they were making steps like that, then injecting the dynamite, and then they were exploding all of it at once, so that as much of the material falls to the lowest level possible, where the prisoners would actually collect it and then bring it out.
Na podobnej zasadzie jak kamienią czy kopalnię.
Just like the normal mine.
The working conditions must have been horrible.
Jest, mówię, że warunki pracy musiały być posłuchać. Może coś tak dodać jeszcze.
Pod ziemią na pewno te warunki były trudne.
Underground that was really bad.
Z uwagi na chłód, który tutaj panuje przez
Because
cały
of the
rok.
cold.
Duży też hałas, który towarzyszył
And
tym
big
leceniom.
noise.
Wiadomo, na czas wysadzania też jest coś.
It really is. It's interesting because it really is a lot colder in here than in the other one.
I hope you're beginning to see how these projects and underground relocations of industry in Germany ties together. From the construction of the Kehlstein house before the war, where all builders from all over Germany volunteered to build this impressive tea house for Hitler in the mountains. I wanted you to see the Kies tunnel system before we went here for the same reason, to understand what could be done. We must understand just how impressive the German construction and production capabilities were during the war, how fast large tunnels could be built, such as Kies, 5 months, 600 laborers. Huge tunnel system. Extrapolate this capability to 30,000 laborers and add half the number in additional civilian specialists, both here and Jonastal, and then look at what we actually see under or on the ground, which is practically nothing. Even if the concrete numbers were fiddled with ever so slightly, and even if the labor numbers as well, they could not have been that far off. The trail of food for these people, payment for the companies, materials, deliveries, specialists allocated. They were doing something, otherwise they would simply have been drafted to the front. Minister Goebbels kept a very keen eye on Albert Speer and his use of staff and personnel, as did he watch other of his rivals everywhere, trying to squeeze out more men for the war effort and win political points. So having people sitting idle as the tide of war was turning was not an option for anybody. So the suggestion that Speer, Himmler and others were simply siphoning off funds or adding resources not used or existing simply would have become too dangerous, especially in a backstabbing hierarchy as in the Nazi state. And Kammler was, like Himmler, not corruptible men. Both were trying to win the war and complete their respective missions as they saw them. Kammler would not have tolerated waste or fraud, nor would Himmler. Time was ticking, and the Russians were coming closer, so assets were packed off from Riese and sent to Jonastal. So the two are linked. But Jonastal was not on the list of Führerhauptquartier, and I do not believe Riese was destined to be one either. Next week, we'll go through the system suggested to be Himmler's headquarters. We also found the other end of the tunnel leading away from the henge, so a very wet visit to some of the underground tunnels in the area, hopefully connecting the dots. And of course, the Sorbonne Riese complex site, the huge above-ground buildings that you have yet not seen. We're going there as well. Stay tuned for a lot more. Behind me is Werner von Braun's first test stand. Down the road is Diebner's nuclear reactor. Over there is the Maginot Line and all its amazing forts. I'm visiting them all and I'm bringing them to you. So I really appreciate you like, follow, and share what I'm doing, trying to document all these important historical locations. And if you feel like you want to watch more pictures or documents that I use for these, go to lostbattlefields.com. And if you feel like helping me out with my travels, because gasoline and travel and airfare is expensive, my PayPal is there, protectionserviceint.com. You are more than welcome, but you don't have to. I appreciate all your support and all your help, and I love seeing these locations, and I love bringing them to you.